I write on Robot Chicken. I was a co-producer of their...
Wait. There you go.
Right,
Okay.
you got it. I'm just giving you a little background.
I want every word.
All right. I'm Kevin Shinick. I'm the creator of Mad, the animated series. I've written some DC Comics, and I also am a writer, co-producer, and voice actor on the Robot Chicken DC Comics special. And subsequently, its second one, which we just finished.
Robot Chicken's awesome, dude.
Thank you very much. We have a great time doing it. So
it's seriously, what do you voice in Robot Chicken?
Well, throughout the season, I do a whole bunch of different voices. But for the special, I was Captain Cold, and more importantly, I was the meanwhile at the Legion of Doom, the Ted Knight of our generation.
Dude, me and my program director at the radio say we do that in the hallway at least twice a week.
Well, they asked me why I was excited to do that, and I said, growing up, that was a staple. You know, it became a joke where in the men's room, the boys' room at the school, I'd be like, meanwhile, in stall number 4.
Exactly.
You know, it's just things you did.
Exactly.
I love it.
Black Mantis polishing us all in.
Yes.
So why do we need an entire special just on DC supervillains?
Well, we've seen so many specials about all of it, you know, comics in general, characters in general. And I think the DC comics are so rich with villains and so rich with characters that you need a whole documentary just to focus on these great, I know a smaller group is called Rogues Gallery, but I think of them all as just the Rogues Gallery of villains, you know, and there's so many of them that you barely get a chance to touch upon them when you see some of these larger documentaries.
One of my favorite things is when, and DC does a good job of it, but like with Suicide Squad, when they take the bad guys and they give them their own title and kind of make them the good guys. Because there's not a lot of times you can do that.
No, well, think about it. It's always about perception. You know, again, one man's terrorist is one man's freedom fighter. You know, they all come from someplace. You know, and they all make decisions. I've said this earlier, but I stumbled upon this, which I find fascinating, but especially how it pertains to this documentary. Jerry Siegel, who of course created Superman with Schuster, I just read that, you know, his father passed away when he was 10, and his father was surprised by some thieves in his cleaners and died and had a heart attack. Now, later that week, an article came out in his local paper saying we should not respond to this with vigilantism, and the author of that article was L. Luthor.
Oh, wow.
So it's this little nugget of like, you get to a crossroads, you know, and Jerry Siegel, what do? Do you become a vigilante and take that into your own hands, or do you create the greatest superhero ever known? And we know what way he went, but you know, what way would we go?
Exactly.
I know, I don't have faith in myself, so I don't know about you.
In terms of all the villains and their perspectives, is there a singular villain or a couple of villains that you would say you would find the most sympathetic?
Yeah, you know, I mean, again, something like the high-profile ones, like Joker and things like that. If I were writing a comic, I would try and find the most sympathetic entry point to these guys, but he would be the most difficult because he is just kind of insane, and we've established that. People like the tertiary characters, maybe the Captain Colds or the Boomerangs or something, where, you know, and DC's done a great job of showing them as, you know, stepdads or people who had been, you know, maybe not the greatest upbringings, and you perceive how they went about their lives, and you kind of understand them. So, is there one particular character? I haven't thought about that to say yes. I would love to go in there, but I go to those tertiary characters because I think they're on the cusp. They're tertiary because they can't completely commit, because I think in my mind, they are wrestling with, well, I don't think I have it in me to be a hero, and yet I need something in my life, so I will, you know, lean towards evil.
In terms of villains, it seems like a lot of their makeup is completely dependent upon who the hero is.
Yes.
So in that respect, do you think that if the villains, you know, were mixed up, so say Flash had Batman's villain,
right,
and vice versa, what do you think the outcome would be?
Well, they've done that at certain times, and it's always showed that these villains are pretty persistent in being jerks, you know? But it is interesting, especially with a Batman Joker scenario because certain heroes push certain buttons and vice versa, I think they should mix it up more because I think the same hero looking at the same villain is staring at the same palette, and someone's different perception will be like, dude, you're staring at this guy. It's clear he's got this issue or something. It's a different take on it, and I'd like to see more of that. Although DC, I think, has done a really good job of, especially lately, really blurring the line between, what is too far. A hero, obviously.
Nothing lately.
Yeah, I know, it's true. Not in the comics per se, but I mean a character's journey. Villains push things too far in an evil way. They're out there, they're robbing banks and doing whatever. In the same sense, heroes are pushing, or vigilantes are pushing things also. But because the outcome is more in society's favor, we tend to be like, oh, they're heroes, but they're both breaking the rules, So I like that DC has really kind of blurred that line. I find it more interesting, and hopefully we're going to find out more about that in the documentary tonight.
Working with on the Robot Chicken special and now on this documentary, do you find that that sort of blurred line approach to the villains separates DC villains from other movie villains or Marvel villains or typical villains in pop culture?
Well, we definitely took that stance with Robot Chicken. We just like the idea that a bunch of guys getting together. And keep in mind, we had the template already in place of the Legion of Doom, and it was kind of set up for us with the Super Friends. So there's already comedic ability to this, of these guys hanging out in a swamp, that tends to lend itself to comedy. Could the same argument be made for other places? Maybe, but I think it's strongest with DC because we have established a organization, a Legion of Doom, a camaraderie of villains that are kind of relying on themselves and relying on each other. And so DC's done the best job of that in my mind, of giving us something to poke fun at, if I'm looking at it from a Robot Chicken point of view. Which is what I do a lot related to me.
I like to ask this, but clearly, what if you could be one of the supervillains, what costume would you put on? And like I said before, it could be just because the costume's cool.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I voiced Captain Cold, but gosh, I don't know where that heavy parka for so long. After a while, and Trickster is just kind of a joke. I think Lex Luthor with his normal outfit is nice. That his Lex Luthor, machine outfit. They haven't done anything that looks comfy. I guess if I had to do it, it would be Scarecrow. Because he's in a burlap sack. Yeah. It's probably comfy, so it might be a little itchy. It might be a little itchy, but I'm gonna lean towards Scarecrow.
Nice.
It seems what's interesting to me about not just the villains and the heroes, but the Flash has always been depicted as being kind of like a therapist to a certain degree with his villain.
Yeah.
Batman's always trying to put them back in Arkham to make them, to fix them. Superman's one hug away from fixing everybody.
Wasn't that the tagline of the movie? One hug away
from
saving the world.
And by a hug around the neck in that case.
Yeah, well done.
So, do you think that it's inherent that heroes want to fix everything and villains always want to destroy things, or do you think that it's more of a... trying to figure out how to say this. Villains don't necessarily want to break everything, but they always want things to go their way.
Yeah.
So is that more of a thing that is inherent of both ways? Do you think that's something that they share?
I don't know in terms of comics, but you put the nail on the head with my marriage. Everything you just said seems innately true with men and women. I think men want to help. They want to solve a problem. And as I've been told countless times, some problems aren't meant to be solved, they're just meant to be listened to, and whatever. And I think that's getting to your point. Sometimes superheroes don't need to fix things, or they're looking for the immediate fix as opposed to the long-term fix. So I think it breaks down to a case-by-case basis, because as you pointed out brilliantly with Batman wanting to put them in Arkham or Flash being a therapist, I think each is a case-by-case basis. Each villain has his own, scratch that needs to be, or itch that needs to be scratched.
Or the other way.
Or the other way,
whatever. What did you learn during this process that was surprising to you when going through all the villains?
That there are some screwed up characters in the DC Comics villain. I think I talked about it in the documentary, but Mr. Banjo came to mind. Yes.
Oh wow.
Yes, Mr. Banjo.
Tell me he's like the most badass dude ever, because that with a name like that, you should be.
He had a banjo, and it was his weapon. And if you go back, we included him in the first DC Comics special. I can't remember his name, but there's another villain. I want to call him like Crotch Man, but he literally had a gun on his groin.
Nice.
And I thought, what was the 70s? I don't think that guy, Mr. Banjo, was like 60s or 70s. I wish I could remember his name. It's not, and in fact, Scott Devine's right here.
Wasn't that Love Machine in the Tarantino movie?
Yes, that's exactly who he was. But they had, there were some hard times at the comic book offices where they were like, we got to get out of here by 3, but we need something, So that's what was the most shocking was, we know the ones who are in the spotlight that we continually go back to, but it's the ones that you unearth as you keep researching that says, what? This guy existed? But I find them fascinating too, that someone created that. Someone thought, maybe this guy, hated playing the banjo, and his parents insisted. He thought, oh, screw you, I'm going to make a villain out of this. I'll make playing the banjo cool.
And then there's the guy that says, I really love my gun.
Yes, exactly.
Mr. Banjo is like the Earth 3 equivalent of El Kabong.
Yes, I'll take that.
Nice.
So, we're talking about like the randomness of these kind of one-off.
Right.
Who's the most, besides those two, but like kind of the most obscure major villain that you've
Last question.
Okay.
Repeat it back to me.
Who's the most kind of major villain, but that you've never heard of? Like one that's like in a lot of books, but you've never really come across it.
Me personally?
Yes.
I don't know enough about Deathstroke. All right, I see him all over the place, and yet I don't think I can tell you much about him. So maybe I'll learn more tonight at the screening. That's what my hope is.
Nice.
Okay. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
All right, take